This is something that actually gets asked quite often, and if you're not familiar with both processes, you might not know the difference between mixing and mastering. So let's take a look. Hi, I'm Ben Whelan at Services for Songwriters. Cards on the table, this actually comes from a couple of very early experiences where people asked me to master their music for them. We loosely discussed timescales, what they wanted and their budget, and I asked them to send me the files so that I could take a listen. What they sent across was actually the multi-tracks for their session, so I went back to them and it turned out they actually needed mixing. It felt obvious to me that mixing and mastering are two very different processes, but in reality I had no right to assume that a prospective client would know that too. Now I always check very early on exactly which one is needed to avoid an awkward situation. But for anyone who doesn't know the difference, or maybe just isn't sure where one process ends and the other one begins, here's a bit of a breakdown. Once all of your tracks have been recorded, whether it's in a DAW like Logic, on tape, or any device that lets you record multiple tracks of audio, it then needs to be mixed. A mixing engineer's job is to balance each of the individual tracks, to create focus and clarity within the track as a whole, but also to engineer an experience that's going to engage the listener from start to finish. This is generally achieved through a combination of automation, creating artificial spaces using reverbs, delays and other effects, controlling the overall dynamics, and also shaping the tone of each element. Once your track sounds great from start to finish, no matter how many tracks it's made up of, it's then bounced down to one stereo file, and that's your mixed track. Technically, you can play that mixed file and you'll hear exactly what you heard when you were mixing. Job done, surely. Well, sometimes, yeah, if it's just a demo, or you're not too precious about how it sounds on different devices or in different formats. But if you're planning to share or release your music, then mastering is definitely worth doing. Now I'm going to be a bit lazy here and read a section off my own website because I think it sums up mastering quite nicely. Mastering is the balancing of your final mix into a form that translates as clearly as possible across all sound systems and platforms. In some cases, this can be as simple as adjusting the overall level to meet industry loudness expectations, or balance a compilation of tracks. However, where further alterations are required, your music can be processed and shaped using a combination of analog and digital tools to provide you with the most suitable radio-ready mastered version of your music. In addition to that, if you have your music mastered by a third party, i.e. someone who didn't mix your track, you're also bringing in an extra set of ears, more importantly, a fresh set of ears. If you've ever managed to get to mix 30, or even just mix 3, chances are you've listened to your mix a fair few times. Although you've probably been listening to your mixes very critically, you've probably also lost quite a bit of perspective. You could argue that putting a bit of time between your mixing and your mastering will bring back some of that perspective, but someone who's never heard the mix before is almost always going to beat you in that respect. As well as any audible changes a mastering engineer might make to your track, whether that's through EQ, compression or surgical changes, they'll also be able to provide your track in all the various formats you might need. They can embed metadata and also change the processing slightly on each different version so that it's more suitable for the intended format. I've heard some professional mix engineers say they don't see the point in mastering, on the basis that they've already mixed it to sound exactly how they want it to sound, so why should anyone else touch it? But there's people who go the other way too. My personal view is that if you can get your music mastered by a third party, then you absolutely should. If you're on a budget and keeping things in-house, whether that's mastering your own mix or having your mixing engineer provide you with a master, just be sure you're getting what you need and that you or your engineer have a firm grasp of where you want your music to be heard. The last point I want to make is that mastering will not fix a problem with your mix. Don't get me wrong, there's some amazing stuff that mastering engineers can do in terms of shaping a sound, and some phenomenal tools that allow them to make really surgical adjustments if they need to. Ultimately though, if your snare drum's too loud, it'll always be better to turn it down in the mix. Depending on the project, your mastering engineer will generally let you know if they feel that something's inherently wrong with the mix or if an adjustment needs to be made. After all, you don't finish a project and then pass it to a mastering engineer. They're part of the process, they have your best interest in mind, and their opinion should be part of your production process. As a quick side note, some mastering engineers do offer stem mastering, whereby they're sent groups of instruments like all of the drums, bass, vocals, and so on. This does mean they have more control over the elements or groups of elements when mastering your track, but it's not the same as mixing. I hope that's been useful and helped clarify some of the differences between mixing and mastering. There's some great resources available if you're looking to find out more about mixing and mastering, including here on YouTube, and I'll link some of those below. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop me a message or leave a comment below. Till next time.